Okay, good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I did say good morning, I think. Thank you, yeah. So try and wake up a little bit now. You have no more excuse for it being the first session. You have plenty of coffee by now. My name is Christopher Ludwig. I'm the editor of Automotive Logistics magazine and, of course, part of the organizers of the event. If there's any confusion, this is session 2B, looking at complexity in inbound logistics. The other sessions, for spare parts, which is, I believe, down the corridor that way, finished vehicles down that way. Hopefully by now you know where you want to be, and hopefully that's here. So also just a reminder again that we have the Automotive Logistics Live function if you want to interact via your smartphone, sending questions, because this is going to be a very interactive session, or at least that's our intention. We only have one presentation, and so we'll limit the kind of, everybody saying how great and big and important their company is, and hopefully get into the nitty-gritty of it. Our first session, I think, was really interesting. It was sort of at a high-level macroeconomic picture and also kind of high-level strategy. So some of those themes I'm sure we can flesh out here, maybe get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty, maybe come down to earth if that's the right way to put it, because here we're obviously looking at very complex supply chains, stable logistics flows, and of course, a lot of complexity. We might have seen a figure of kind of headline growth, 4 or 5% in production, but of course that masks a lot of change, whether it's Russia, whether it's consolidating production in Spain, for example, or elsewhere, or in Eastern Europe. Of course, all of that change brings change in the supply base, and that brings a lot of change in logistics, all of it challenging, but of course opportunities in that space, whether it's for optimization or indeed for logistics providers. Of course, the world is not equal either, so I think we have an interesting array of voices on our panel. I'm sure that the challenges of a Jaguar Land Rover, perhaps at the moment, trying to squeeze as much production out of sort of limited space might not be the same that every car maker certainly not the same challenge that every car maker is facing. But we have a chance to kind of compare and contrast and look at some of those challenges. So let me introduce our panelists to you briefly, and then we'll hear more from them obviously as we go through. I'll say it in the order who will speak. We'll first hear from Mark Ellis. Mark is Global Industry Director of Automotive for Geodis. And then on our panel, everyone will get a chance to kind of properly introduce themselves afterwards. But we have Bert Bong, who's the Manager of Material Logistics and Supply Chain Management for Europe at Ford. David Lasseter, who's the Freight Strategy Manager for Global Material and Planning and Logistics at Jaguar Land Rover. Lutz Quietmeyer, who's the General Manager of Inbound Logistics for Alliance Logistics Europe for Renault Nissan. And last but certainly not least is Bram Ewals, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Ewals Cargo Care. Again, please get ready for questions. Let's be as interactive as possible. We don't want a session of lecturing or indeed of just me interviewing, because that would be boring for everybody, I think. So let's invite now Mark up for his presentation.
It's really cozy up there with 5 of us. There was only 3 this morning, and they were smaller than us as well. So, firstly, if there's 2 weeks ago, we were invited by one of our customers to watch Schalke versus Real Madrid, and when they managed to lose 2-0 at home. And then we thought we needed to return the favor, and we got them tickets last night for the Bernabeu, and I was asked if I wanted to take the customer, but of course I came here because I'm loyal to you guys instead. And actually, that's not the reason at all. I thought they would get stuffed. I thought that the German customer would be so upset and disappointed watching his team get hammered. And then I watched it in the bar last night, and they managed to win. So that was fantastic for them. And I've had a couple of calls with him this morning, and he's like all his birthdays came at once. So he's so happy. Right, for anybody struggling to have got a hotel room in Bonn in the area this week, I've had a word with the hotel. They've given me the name and address of every one of the 120,000 dentists that's staying in this area. And we're going to go and beat them up after the session and put them in one of Bill's Powerlux trucks outside, and we're going to ship them away. So let's hope that goes well. Okay, I heard Louis this morning open this event. And at the event, Louis said that he had a look around the room, and he thought that he wasn't the worst looking person in the room. I've had a really good look around the room in the coffee break, and I'm not so sure. I think we have a beautiful group. And so Louis, if you're around, or Chris in his absence, please convey that back. And no, you won't look any different in a couple of years, honey. I've actually known Louis for about nearly 20 years now, so we met at kindergarten, as you can... You don't believe that either, oh dear. Okay, someone in the room asked me to do something, mention something I did last year. I'm not sure if you were here last year, but I'm going to ask you all now to do something for me. I want you to stand up for a second. Okay, that's all. It's just the guy from TRW, Helger, I think is in here somewhere. He said that last year I did this and I got people to participate in something, a little shouting game. He really remembered that, and I thought I would do it again, but you know what? There's a lot of you that were here last year and you would know and cheat, so we're not going to do that again. But I have proven one thing, Helger, is I can get everyone to interact and to stand up in a room. So thank you, and please sit down. Okay. This is actually, you're going to see something for the very, very first time, and that's why I wanted to take the opportunity to present, is that in the last couple of days, we have decided that we will no longer be the different companies and different brands we had across Europe. So Calverson and BM and Geodis Logistics and Geodis Wilson is going, and now we are one, and I've got a couple of slides on that before I talk about what we're supposed to talk about. And we are now just going to be Geodis. And our strap line that we've come up, and it's been on French TV all this week, is "We Logistic Your Growth." So the mission, the vision, and the values, they haven't changed. But we are, for those of you that don't know us, we are pretty much one of the largest companies in Europe in that we're owned by French Railways. As French Railways are owned by the French government, that kind of means we're owned by the French government, but they don't interfere so much, and they change every few years anyway, so they keep out of our affairs, which is kind of nice. So, but we're the largest, or second largest part of the SNCF division, but it does give us a huge advantage in terms of our standing and in terms of our capitalization. So we're one of the companies who don't have to keep looking in the bank to see if we can afford to do things, which is kind of nice. So within the division, Geodis, as it said before, overall was 9 billion in terms of its organization. So we think we're a significant player. It doesn't say on these slides, but Automotive to Geodis, just within this division, is about 1 billion. It makes it between our second and third biggest product line, so it's immensely important to us. And when we're including in that is finished vehicle distribution, which would be if you're in here for finished vehicles, you're in the wrong session. That would be my colleagues from STVA. Yeah, we're a significant player in that, particularly in France, Germany, and the UK. Most of our business is around, we consider ourselves global. We all call ourselves global. Do you know what? I haven't yet come across a logistics company that's in all 204 countries that's currently registered in the world. We're in 66, 67 of them, and we're going to be in a few more, but we have partners everywhere else we need to be. But we do think that, certainly in all the major markets we are there, but because of our history, 75, 77% of our business is still in Europe, and that's kind of interesting in itself, because this is where the bills are paid in Europe. Because a lot of you people in the room will know that you're dealing with a lot of business in Asia, and it gets shipped to Europe, and the bills are paid in Europe, so this is where actually it's declared revenue. It's not actually where we undertake everything. So, as we've said there, all of these different activities now, which distribution, road transport, freight forwarding, contract logistics, and our supply chain division, is now all under Geodis. And I was going to put the advert on, but it's in French. My French is terrible, so I could have asked Olivier to come up and to translate it for us, or we can just say, have a look on YouTube, because we've downloaded it to there as well. And it's kind of a catchy tune. It's something that I'm glad they didn't make me sing it. That's all I'm going to say. Okay. This is now what we're asked to talk about in session 2B. The automotive supply chain is layered and complex. So what are the optimal strategies and challenges facing us? Well, it's really nice when they send you a brief. It's even nicer when they send you a brief and tell you that everyone else on the panel is smarter than you, and that they're going to know the answers. So I'm going to have to give a presentation because I won't get a chance to speak later if I don't. So. But no, we've all kind of got a flavor and an opinion on this, and we've got a really a diverse panel on there with OEMs and suppliers as well as Chris being extremely knowledgeable about the industry as well. So we have to look at this, and I started thinking, well, what's causing the increased layering of the supply chain? And I'm focusing on the word increase here. So supply chain is increasing, the complexities are increasing, customer demands are increasing, globalisation is increasing, cost pressure is increasing, and then volatility, increased need for innovation, increased need for system and process, and everything's increasing. The demands on the supply chain seems to be increasing, making it more complex and more layered. Historically, a lot of people, I'm including OEMs, tier ones, and also the 3PLs as well. The way that supply chain has evolved is as something new has happened, you've bolted on a solution to what you already had and not really gone back and reinvented it. And I think that that's obviously now showing some strains and some constraints, and that we need to sort of maybe take a step back and to think that through. But everything is there's more demands being placed on the supply chain on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual basis. The presentations this morning were kind of interesting in where, particularly PwC, and where the industry is going to go in the next 5-6 years. Do you know what? It's interesting, but I remember being at a presentation in 2006 when Automotive was doing this in terms of production, and the forecast was to carry on doing this. But then 2008 happened, and oh yeah, he did this. So it's, everything that's forecast, it has to be and is based on historic data and based on trends and what's happened before. And I think sometimes we need to have a look at what else could happen as well. And that's, I guess, where we start to need to look at the demand for innovation. But is everything increasing? No, not everything is going to go up. That's the good news. The bad news is there's an expectation of reduced costs. They want costs to go down. You want downtime to go down. You want less errors. And there's kind of a widespread feel that there's a reduced talent pool in the industry as well, because more people are after it, and people are no longer seeing it as a future. But the good news is this is going to become the Earth is a definite size. It's not going to change. The only place that's increasing in size on the Earth is because of global warming, the oceans are getting bigger, and because of the tectonic plate movements, the Himalayas are getting taller, and they don't really affect our supply chain so much. Although if Maersk find out the oceans are getting bigger, you can bet that the price may go up because of that, because they're moving further. So, but no, hopefully we'll come to a definitive size, and we'll get to a status that we got to in the mid-late 90s, where we can, we can be more positive about our forecasts, and they will be more understandable. But for me, it's all about the P's. Oh, it should be the letter P, not the product P. I think that what we have to look at when we're talking about complexity and demand is the people, principles, production, process, packaging, and pressure, and the management thereof. But finally, and most importantly, is we need to be in this together, all of us, and we need to be working in partnership. Okay? That's kind of it for me. It was quick, it was brief. If you've enjoyed it, my name is Mark Ellis. If you haven't, my name's Louis Yakumi. And I look forward to questions and talking to you guys later. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Thanks for taking on the challenge of not being the smartest one on the panel. We asked you to do that because we know you face that situation quite often, actually. So. No. Thanks. No, I think Mark, of course, kicks us off with some great questions and some great points there, kind of hitting the headline of this conference, which we also should remember as well. About focusing on your assets and people being among those chief assets. So and partnership obviously plays a big role in that. But I'd like to give our other panelists a chance now to weigh in and kind of talk about their perspectives from the complexity and some challenges. So perhaps we'll start with Bert, and then we'll move down the panel.
Okay, thanks, Christopher. Yeah, Bong from Ford. For a couple of years now, I'm responsible for inbound logistics, supply chain, and customs duties. Before I did about 10 years finished vehicle logistics. Yeah, the subject here is challenges and opportunities, I think. And coming first to the challenges as a variety. First, in Ford, I think the products are reasonably known in the audience here, what Ford produces. So I don't need to introduce those. It's not advertising, but buy the products, please. No, our challenges really has been addressed and is being addressed over the last years. We changed drastically the manufacturing footprint in Ford of Europe. As you probably know, or for sure know if you are in the industry and work partly together with us, we changed the footprint so far that we just recently in January, end of last year, we closed the Genk plant. The year before, we closed already the Southampton body assembly plant and the Dagenham stamping facility. So that was quite a big change. So not only finished products, which we reallocate to other factories, but as well internal source parts such as big stampings, which we produce now in different places. Having said that, the products get now built basically or got absorbed, the volume got absorbed in the Valencia plant. That is probably the biggest impact. A little bit in Saarlouis in Germany, as far as the C-Mix is concerned, and what Southampton did is done now in Turkey by our Ford Otosan joint venture. So that is definitely a challenge because there was a major change, not only in the production facilities as well, but as well for the supply chain, for the logistics, because the footprint in Europe changes dramatically. So complete lanes of transportation were eliminated, and others see much more volume. Now, traditionally, with the footprint we had, if you imagine the European map, heavily German, Belgium, Britain-based, somewhat production facilities, and Valencia we had for decades already. But the sourcing for parts basically was towards Eastern Europe because that is low labor countries, and a certain portion as well from Asia Pacific, China, and so on. But for Ford, at least not to that a big extent from Asia Pacific. So mainly there was a trend to source in Eastern Europe. As we now move heavily into products into Valencia as our biggest plant right now in Europe, 400,000 units in the very near future, 5 different products in one facility, which includes as well a commercial vehicle such as the Transit Connect, which is available as a commercial van, but as well as a people mover. In the first step, obviously, the manufacturing footprint moves away from the supply base because the supply base couldn't follow immediately. So now we are working with a purchasing team actually on a weekly basis. We have sessions where we now try to move again in the more sort of bullseye sourcing environment. And what was good in the past, Eastern Europe, is now probably not for the long term the right sourcing anymore. So we look more into the Iberian Peninsula, but now we look as well in countries which we didn't look too much before, which is, for example, Northern Africa and Morocco, because that is reasonably near to Spain. So you see that is a big challenge already for us in the logistics and obviously for the service providers to follow us where we are and where our suppliers are. The other thing is with the new products which we are launching in these facilities, we see much more globalization. You mentioned already globalization subject from the session as well. So we see much more components coming from abroad, heavily as well from North America, because some of these products are really global products and we build them, for example, in North America already. So, and now you have to make the decision whether you have a dual sourcing and buy dual tools, for example, which drives a piece cost up and investment up, or you have a single sourcing in the best place and Basically, these business cases drive decisions where ultimately we see much more material coming from overseas. This suggests already that from the logistics point of view, first of all, we and you, at least the ones who serve us in the business, do a fairly good job, because as long as it is more beneficial to source something in North America and just ship it over the ocean, then the logistics is not as expensive that it would drive a different decision. Having said that, this is a challenge as such, because you have much more inventory on the ocean. You have the predictability is obviously not that good, because you can have heavy weather. And what people sometimes forget, obsolescence. When you change product, or you modify parts, or you switch over from an old product to a new product, it's much more difficult to plan the production and the supply chain so that you don't have obsolete parts at the end. It's reasonably easy to say that is the last day of production of, let's say, the old Cougar or something like this in our case. And from the next day we build something different. And if the supply base is within reach, that is fairly easy, and you can do that. But if you have 3 weeks on the ocean, with not that precise estimated times of arrival and so on, so there's a fair chance that at the end either you have not enough parts or too many. Not enough is dramatic, because then basically you cannot build the last few cars anymore because a key part is missing, and on the next day you don't produce these cars anymore, so there's a hard stop. So you see, obsolescence is a big issue. The other issue is customs duties. We see huge growth in customs duties, and that is not necessarily part of this discussion here, but basically we see, which was a small effect in the past, it's growing drastically because we import products from all over the world, finished products, vehicles, into Europe. We export vehicles, and we bring parts from overseas. And so that is getting bigger and bigger over the years. Maybe we talk later about, I mean, as I said, what is more challenging is, or more changes will be driven by free trade agreements, probably. I mean, TTIP is something which you read one or the other day in the press, and if that comes, that again changes probably one or the other business case, where I said the business case is what does it cost to produce it here and ship it there, or including duties and freight. And if TTIP comes, for example, that might change again the game. And maybe before I spoil the meeting completely here with my speech, I think you mentioned Russia as well. Russia as such is a big challenge. We in Ford, we entered into a joint venture with Ford Solos, as we call it right now. We have 3 plants, the St. Petersburg plant, which we used to have already, and then the 2 plants in Tatarstan. And basically, as we just did it a few years ago, the crisis came along, and all the political difficulties with Russia are not helpful. So the market is, the demand is much lower than we expected, and that is a challenge as such. Maybe I stop here to give the team a chance to talk more and then come up with questions later.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Bert. I think that first of all, it's just interesting to note that if you had come this year and we used maybe an old slide of a supplier map and stuff, it would be basically completely redundant at this point. So it's quite interesting just to note these changes and what they mean for logistics. So thank you for sharing those, and I'm sure we'll dig into that a bit more. But we'll hear from Lutz now.
So my name is Lutz Quietmeyer. I work for Renault Nissan. So most probably everybody knows our Renault and Nissan brands, but we have an increasing complexity due to the fact that we produce as well for other brands. So Daimler is one of the, I would say, the recent partnerships. So you most probably know that the new Twingo and the new Smart are actually on the same built on the same factory and on the same platform. And we have the same example on other models. But we do the same as well with Fiat, with GM, and we have as well a joint venture in Russia with Avtovaz, so the former Lada manufacturer. So in this environment, obviously all these OEMs, they have their own strategies to source, to replenish, to transport, and when we build I would say the partnerships for each of these productions, yes, we somehow have to find a compromise so that everybody gets his responsibility clear, and obviously this increases the complexity for the logistics part. In addition, we as well build a lot of powertrains, so engines and gearboxes for other manufacturers. So this is an additional, I would say, layer of complexity, because we not only supply our own factories, but a lot of other factories. Another point within this, I would say, alliance setup is that we more and more source the same parts. We are not the only OEMs doing this, but we are more into what we call a module strategy. That means we try to harmonize the different parts of a vehicle to source them together. So obviously when we have then production in several factories, this increases the complexity when we take sourcing decisions. And at the same time, I think as a lot of the players, we try to reduce inventory even after the crisis. So all kind of logistics solutions that bring benefits on cost, for example, will always be looked at. What is the inventory impact? So this is maybe the overall picture for the company I'm working for. But when we talk about how to cope with this complexity, we think that we are not, and maybe we've seen it this morning, looking at the Amazon example or other businesses, that we are still, I would say, not so flexible, because we have in the automotive industry not only the logistics area, but we have the new model development, which takes a certain time, production facilities and processes which are heavy. So we are looking recently, for example, for alternative transport solutions. Multimodal is still for us an important topic. We would love to be more innovative as well on the ISIT side. As well, I think we had a first flavor this morning on the cloud technology. When we look at the way we operate, we still believe strongly that there's room for improvement in the collaboration with our partners and I would say our ISIT capabilities, I have to say, to be more flexible. And yes, we heard from Geodis with I think there are a lot of solutions out there. So we have currently, I would say, two different models. We call it make and buy, even if it's not, I think, academically the right definition. So we either build our routes and transport solutions our own, buying only full truckloads, or we work with part of you here, looking at more 3 or 4PL solutions. So, and we would like to be as flexible as possible to choose, depending on the business environment, on the scopes, on our needs, the adequate model. So I think these are the challenges we are looking at for the coming months and years. And obviously this will not go without you. So I'm very happy to share with you and to listen to your viewpoints.
Thank you, Lutz. Again, I think highlighting changes and also very specifically lots of opportunities for providers here to bring solutions, bring new ideas. David?
Good morning, everybody. So I'm David Lasseter, Freight Strategy Manager for Jaguar Land Rover. I joined Jaguar Land Rover relatively recently, and it's fascinating for me to be here at my first conference and hearing about the challenges. And I think I came from a retail background, so interestingly sat here this morning talking about Amazon. I thought I was almost at the wrong conference and brought back some memories. But I think that the bit that's really interesting for me in terms of evaluating the health of the automotive logistics capability. And you know, I can reassure you that coming from retail, the bits that we've spoken about this morning are absolutely right in terms of the operational quality. And I share some of the other comments about how we need to focus and work together to drive forward and improve through innovation and partnerships to develop a solution for the future. Now, I think, you know, I joined Jaguar Land Rover at a particularly interesting time in terms of growth. We too, like the guys have spoken about here, have challenges from a globalisation perspective and that global growth, but also we've got great opportunity within the UK in terms of growth at the plants that we have here, and also we've recently opened the new engine facility at Wolverhampton, which presents, I guess, another set of opportunities, but also but challenges, I guess, that we have to work through with our logistics providers. So I guess where do I see the focus for my role in the next few years? It's all about, and someone touched on it this morning, in the industry, it feels very much as if we are in the here and now, dealing with yesterday's problem or today's problem. So I think the real challenge is about how do we create that fire break to think about what the future needs to look like. And that's not something that anybody can do in isolation. And the word partnerships has been used earlier today, and I think that's absolutely right in terms of how we work together to, and when I say together, I mean with logistics providers, but also, of course, internally, to make sure that we're all clear in which direction we're going in, to devise a solution that's going to work. So challenges around LLP relation or logistics provider relationships, working in partnership, creating innovation. So again, it was talked about this morning that we have operational quality in automotive logistics, and yes, I believe that exists, but in terms of the innovation, there's a challenge around how we drive that forward with the pressures on cost. And I think a bit that we always need to remember is the sustainability element here. So it's about creating a strategy that delivers sustainability, whether it be through more efficient load fill or more environmentally friendly vehicles. And I think I would conclude again, just to reiterate the message that whatever we do to improve things, to drive things forward, it has to be done in partnership. Okay.
Thank you very much, David. Again, sharing a lot of opportunities here. I think that's one of the key words that keep coming out, and partnership, of course. So that's very appropriate now that we can have a logistics provider, maybe to have the perspective from that side.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
As we're saying, we can't exist without them too.
Thanks. My name is Bram. Good morning, everybody. I'm representing Ewals Cargo Care. It's a fourth-generation family business, actively in logistics. And just to get you a little bit of an idea of what we do, we manage approximately 5,000 shipments a day. So we have a size of 550 million turnover. And half of that we do non-asset based. So we work with third parties, cross-docks operators. But the other 2,500 shipments we consolidate to what we call 1,500 full load transports. And we operate that with 3,000 mega units, which are all Huckepack XLS. I will come to that a little bit later. And we do that with a group of 1,750 people. Just for you to get a little bit of the picture. Now, what we see, because we all recognize this complexity in the supply chain, we also recognize that the supply chain is not stable anymore, is a living thing. And I would like to share with you two things. One is how did we respond to that? And also secondly, how we see that evolving to the future. First thing what we did is we already saw that, especially in 2007, where we decided that, because we're also a carrier, first and foremost, that to deal with this volatility in demand and this changing supplier footprints, it's important that we have one asset which is reliable and available. So we decided in 2007 to go for a multi-usable asset, which we call, it's a mega Huckepack, so it's craneable, and therefore we could use road, ferry, short sea, but also rail, much more interconnectively and much more on a flexible scale. So therefore, whether there be capacity constraints or opportunities to use a certain modality, we'll be able to do so. And that's what we've done. So at least from an asset perspective, we are much more flexible to deal with the needs of the customer. Because they can still use it as a warehouse and wheels trailer, they can still use it for their just-in-time processes, and we feel that that's something of a requirement for the automotive industry. So we focus very much on the network. So which are the corridors we can focus to with the right equipment, but also to keep innovating in the type of equipment. because we see that's important also to be able to supply for the automotive industry. On the other hand, we also see that we are much more coming into a role of an orchestrator, because to deal with this demand, we cannot always have our own assets at the right place, because there's a sheer limit of size, there's a sheer limit of possibilities, and therefore we invested quite a lot in technology, where we actually try to set and also to calculate this footprint in a much more swifter way. So if a customer says, I've got a change in the supply chain, or I'm resourcing, we are much more able to redevelop and recalculate this logistics footprint. We also had to hire and also implement this complexer software and applications with more smarter people. So we've started as a logistics company to employ econometrists, for example, to work at heuristics, to make sure that we have the right calculation methods to deal with setting up these blueprints, not only to be able to calculate it, but also to do it in a much quicker way. Because we see that, and it was already said earlier, that everybody recognized that the most ideal footprint today is probably not the best one tomorrow, or let's say in a couple of months' time. So we really see that we need to adapt to this volatility in demand. Now, how do we see that progressing to the future? If I talk about this technology and also this control tower philosophy, ultimately we would like to have this technology linked to, let's say, an operational system where, for example, corridor planning using different kind of modalities could be, one corridor could, for example, be more feasible on the Monday versus the Friday. And how can you change this? Or what would be the ideal milk run planning? And we see that you always have a little bit of a lack of time in calculating what is the most ideal option. So ultimately, we hope, and we are working on that, to have the system as intelligent that we can link up this operational system and this knowledge base much more in a quicker way. And the other thing is data. And this is something which is, we haven't figured it out completely. What I mean by that is that if you want to manage complexity, we see that the exchange of data between a customer and the logistics provider is becoming very important. And what we typically see is that, on one hand, the logistics service provider wants to be this party to share a platform. And on the other hand, we're also faced with customers who fear, let's say, a little bit like a lock-in syndrome, where they're afraid that once the data is in a system, they cannot get it out. So we are wondering at this moment is that if, although everybody recognizes the fact that we could have easily data exchange, which party would be the best one to serve this? Now, for example, if you look at EDI connections, typically where you have an orchestrator focus, we have to set up EDI connections. It takes a time. I think it's pretty costly. Where you could wonder that, especially when supply chains are changing ever so often, everybody in this market is building up new EDIs, starting to set up the new processes again. So the question would be, what if we could put it in, let's say, in a cloud environment, where once you've made the connection and it's being reused by another carrier, so to say, or the customer says, well, actually, I want to change the footprint, that at least the investment in the connection to capture data is not a sunk cost. So that could also mean that somebody who's invested in the EDI connection could actually be paid back once somebody else is using it. So these are the two comments I'd like to make regarding the topic of managing complexity.
Thank you, Bram. Okay, great. Well, like I said, we've heard there from a great range of companies, different car makers and logistics providers. We've heard about change, we've heard about opportunities, partnership. Let's open it up to questions, your comments. Okay, this isn't the dental convention, but if you want to pull their teeth out, you're more than welcome. And I would encourage it as a journalist. If not, I'll do it. So any questions from the floor this time? Perhaps I should stand. No one? Okay, so the first one will have to come from me. It feels more formal and if I do it over here, so I think I'll create the effective distance as is necessary to interrogate, perhaps. You all brought up partnership and the importance of working with your providers. Some of you have highlighted specific change, so Ford concentrating a lot more in Spain, JLR obviously with a new plant, growth on a kind of unprecedented scale for the company, Renault, Nissan across different partnerships with companies. How do you see logistic skills in this? Are you seeing shortages? So, for example, in Spain, are you having to work more closely with providers for training, or even with in-house staff? Are you seeing some gaps and in places? I'm saying Spain for Ford in that case, but obviously it would be different for everybody. So maybe if we can talk about training and skills?
No, I don't think there is actually a shortage in skills or a lack of knowledge. I think from an education point of view, over the last decades, logistics at universities, for example, found much more interest, and you can study logistics, which you probably couldn't do 20 years ago, these sort of things. When you talk about Spain, there's a lot of well-educated workforce available because it went through a crisis and obviously a lot of unemployed people before. So from that point of view, not that a big difference. But if I may, I just want to talk about the opportunity, which is not related to skills, but I said already, I did some compliments to the team here when I said, well, logistics are really doing well, because as long as shipping around the globe is the better solution than investing in dual or triple sourcing all over the globe at suppliers and with tooling, logistics can't be that bad. Now the inbound logistics network, I think, is a very fine-tuned and well simulated and well-established system, and we meet time windows, very narrow time windows, and that works in most cases very well. I think the big opportunity is not in skills, but we have to change focus. And we have to change the focus so far that we probably in the past didn't look that much into the empty returns, because before we start shipping at a supplier, the supplier needs boxes. And the return network is quite a cost element as well. If you just assume for a second, and I make up a number, don't quote that is a Ford official number, but it's probably not that far from the truth. If you have a foldability of let's say 5-to-1 in packaging, so for every 5 trucks with material, you have to send 1 truck with empties. That varies pretty much from the packaging, and engine racks are different. And so packaging as such plays a major role. If you talk about global shipments, there is a very fine balance between returnable packaging, which again costs then probably for 5 containers you ship in one direction with material, you ship one bag with empty racks, or you use one-way packaging. And actually, I did my own calculation a while ago that there are cases where you could say, even from the CO2 perspective and environment, it is probably borderline or even better to use wooden pallets to ship engines around the globe rather than returnable steel racks, because you just generate quite some traffic, depending how you look at it, because you might argue that the big vessels, the container vessels, have to reposition anyway, whether you have now a container on or not. So that's difficult to say. And then again, the network planning and monitoring at a quality level we have with filled material, with filled containers and racks and packaging versus the planning and the quality of the network for empties. I think that is a big opportunity, and I think you asked before we set up the session here, where you probably can distinguish or could generate a competitive advantage. I think the OEMs are pretty near in the logistic network as such, because we use as well the same sort of solution, the same service providers, which are more or less here in the room. So there is probably, coming back to the skills, not that much a big difference in terms of knowledge and how to do it. But a big opportunity I could imagine is still on the return side, to feed the suppliers with the packaging they need. Sorry if I deviated a little bit from your question.
That's fine. That's fine. Anybody want to pick up on either the question or the deviation? You're more than welcome. So, if anyone else has comments.
I've got a little alternate view on that to add to what Bert's saying, is that, and actually your event is actually a terrific example of it, is I think that there's a lot of opportunity in there for synergizing supply chains on the finished vehicles with coming back with products. And in the next, in 2C I think it is, in the finished vehicles, wherever that is, 2A, 2C, there's a product in there from convertible trailers with the Autobox. whereas you can actually bring parts back on a finished vehicle transporter. And the fact is that most of the OEMs, and I'm not going to say all, I'm certainly not pointing at any of my esteemed colleagues on here, but we can pick on one who's not here very easily. And most of the OEMs are actually sort of, their purchasing strategies, they will have different people accountable and responsible for finished vehicles and different people accountable and responsible for parts and for aftermarket and for inbound supply chain. And because of that, the opportunity to synergize the two isn't really happening. And I think that as an event, you recognize the fact that they are different because of the fact they're not in this room. You know, the finished vehicle logistics seminars are seen as an entire product on their own, and they're somewhere else. But I think there's a terrific future and an opportunity to synergize both of them with the supply chains. We're trying to reuse these assets that's already on the roads anyway, with products like the Autobox and perhaps others as well that may come along in the future, to be able to take miles off the road, to be able to, that will reduce cost as well. But it does require a certain degree of confidence, of innovation, and of working together, not just with the 3 and the 4 PLs working with the OEMs, but also the OEMs working together internally.
Both Bert and Lutz, and I personally know, have had long careers in outbound as well. So do you have any comment on that side in terms of how that joins up?
That's a very good point, very good observation. Actually, I remember, because I'm joining this conference probably for, I don't know, 15 years, if it exists already those days, but pretty much from the beginning, I think. And in the old days, it was a common session here, inbound and outbound, or finished vehicle. And then the decision was to spread it, because half of the forum probably was bored by the subject which they were really not interested in, or not the subject matter experts at all. But the other observation is, I would think that very few of the service providers here in the room really can provide services on both sides, for finished vehicles and for material movements. And there it starts already. That is quite different. And if I just looked at the presentation from Geodis, okay, it comes all under STVA anyway, but the finished vehicle piece of STVA is a separate legal entity, or you know, from the inbound. So it starts there, and only very few companies which, and I've been on both sides, which serve both areas of business. And that makes it difficult, but the big opportunity exists to combine, because when you move material into a plant and build a vehicle, the vehicle leaves again. So to use the assets better, that is probably a way forward.
Thank you. Anyone else want to add?
Yes,
or, yeah, please.
I can confirm.
Yeah.
I think we were looking in the past as well for combined solution. There are only very few examples where actually we made it work. And for me, it's rather a pure opportunistic approach, because when you look at the assets, currently we optimize the trailers, the trailer sizes, heights, etc. So when we look at combined solutions, by definition, it will not optimize for the vehicle transportation and not optimized for parts. So if there's a longer distance flow where I would say the return is empty, then it's opportunistic, and we could imagine that we only have the transportation at marginal cost, but setting up a solution where for both sides it's optimal is a little bit more difficult to imagine.
Yeah. Any question here?
Yeah, good morning.
We've got the mic coming, if you could just name and company.
Good morning. My name is Roger Needham from TNT. It's a question generally for the panel. You've discussed collaboration. I think, Lutz, you mentioned some of the work you're doing for other manufacturers. Do you see a state in the future where between manufacturers there will be a greater level of collaboration, maybe on key inbound supply chain flows? Because I guess a lot of you are sourcing components from similar tier 1s and tier 2s. Do you think there's an opportunity 3-5 years down the line to work together in a similar way that you're collaborating on the contract manufacturing of certain components?
It's a little bit tricky question, because obviously these partnerships are there's a frame around it, a contractual and legal frame. So yes, we will do more partnerships. Now, are we always able to combine our logistics forces? To be honest, I cannot answer. Currently, what we define is that one or the other partner takes care about the logistics for both parts. But this is not really a partnership. This is just allocating the responsibilities.
Collaboration is a subject, I think. I have heard here at this conference as well for quite a few years. It's always an interesting subject because you would imagine, yeah, somebody runs a truck this way and somebody else needs to have it other way. Very difficult to achieve. We have in Ford, we have experiences with that because for a couple of years, as you know, we were together with our brothers and sisters from Volvo as well from Jaguar Land Rover. So we had, let's say, other manufacturers under the big Ford umbrella, and the easiest collaboration you would think before we cooperate with a real competitor is to collaborate with somebody who belongs to ultimately to the same group. And I think we did it. To get there, it was sort of difficult because it started already with different systems and different data, which people expect on both sides. So you have to kind of harmonize this before both sides are happy. And so it can be done. Even more difficult, of course, if you talk to a sort of competitor. And I personally arrive at a stage where I say, I see this as a job of our lead logistics providers, of our service providers. I basically don't want to go to the competitor, although I like to meet everybody here in the conference to say, shall we set something up? No, I have service providers who say, well, look, I could attract business from Renault Nissan, which goes this direction, and why don't we do it for you in the other way direction, because otherwise I run empty and we can fill the network and say, yes, that's the best way if we kind of do it that way. Over the many years, I have seen very, very little examples like this where somebody from the service providers comes proactively and says, look, I'm just quoting for traffic for, let's call it Renault Nissan, which goes, because I know the Ford's manufacturing footprint, there's common knowledge. As I just explained it, for the people who didn't know before where we produce cars, and I know that you need to move things in the other direction, so if you combine it, that will bring efficiency. I have seen very, very little examples where somebody comes proactively, but I don't see a manufacturer in the role to drive that. That is part of the experts in the logistics service provider, I would think.
Can Roger, firstly, you know it's a great question when the whole panel leans backwards and nobody wants to answer first, so thank you for that. From a logistics provider standpoint, there's a couple of examples. I mean, firstly, when China started to develop and the growth there, the German manufacturers, the OEMs in China, got together and they formed a common policy over there, and that including the logistics services on that. They did it in China, but it's kind of not been replicated anywhere else, and they no longer do it as they've got to a certain critical size over there. I would think that from our standpoint, I don't think that the OEMs and the tier ones, of course, are against it. I think that you get some manufacturers, particularly in products like Philip Morris and the cigarettes and stuff like that, they actively won't allow other people within their supply chain because they see if you're getting to something else to the point of sale instead of their product, then they have less chance of selling their product. So I don't think they're as anti it on that. But Bert's comment is true. It is down to us, to the LSPs, to come with that. But unfortunately, all of these guys, they have their own purchasing policies, and their tenders all go out at different times. And so when I can come to them and say, company A, I've got this, this trade lane of mine. We've got a massive infrastructure on it. We can offer a really good and a terrific price on that. It tends to be that it's out of sync with their own contracts and their own negotiation. And so it does become a little bit more difficult.
less so on maybe on road and stuff like that, but on mainline transportation and main areas, it's kind of tough from our point. We'd love to do it. We would love to, because we can actually, if we can get more people on the same trade lanes, we can actually increase the profit, a little bit, but not so much. And it's just something that the opportunity doesn't come up as often as maybe it should.
I think, so if I can just build on this, I think I spoke earlier about the operational quality at the moment within the automotive logistics area, and that question, Roger, is very much in my mind about the innovation. Yeah. So there are examples of exactly what you're describing working within the retail and consumer area, but to the points that everybody else has made here, just to reiterate, the challenge is very much about the facilitation. So and the role, I guess, that the LLPs play in it. So facilitation is the key word, understanding where the opportunities lie and making those cost and commercial conversations easy. Yeah, so I think that's the challenge, because it's very difficult for me as an OEM to talk to another OEM about their costs with their LLP. It's not right. So it has to be about that facilitation. But it is something that can work. It is the right, or could be the right thing to do, because it ticks the boxes around inventory, stock holding, costs, sustainability, etc., etc. So that type of idea is something that I certainly wouldn't ignore into the future. And going back to my initial point, it's about that type of innovation that we want to see, I think.
Maybe I can just not rectify, but give some complementary information. Obviously, when you have a partnership which is very well advanced and formalized, which is, for example, the case for Renault Nissan, or even the integration of afterwards, then it's a natural, development that you do everything together. You align your contracts, you try to, as much as you can, align specifications to enable common transport and harmonization. Now, when we talk about partnerships where we are rather in a buying-selling mode, then obviously this is a little bit more complex, and this is where we expect, yes, you, the industry, to be the facilitator of combining, and obviously I'm always a little bit frustrated when I talk to other OEMs or parts manufacturers, and I find out that there's a huge backflow where I think I pay too much and that this was not used. So simply provocative, but yes, I can consider that, especially you, the big carriers, this is your key competence to find backloads and run empty as less as possible.
Thank you. Any other questions or points? We have a question right in the back. Oh, yeah.
Hi, Tim McCormick from EXL. During this discussion, there's been a great deal of emphasis on partnerships in terms of top-line growth, in terms of outside, bringing manufacturing and logistics together. I was curious, in terms of focus within both the manufacturing and logistics communities, is there a focus, is there an interest on building partnerships to look at internal processes, internal efficiency, building better profitability and higher margins through back office optimization, possibly using outside partners? And also in terms of looking at all these external partnerships and growth initiatives, do you feel that your organizations from an internal perspective are ready to address and manage those relationships and processes?
Pretty easy one.
Everybody's gone backwards again.
Yes. Go ahead.
No, I forgot. I had an answer, but I forgot the first question. Sorry, help me again. What was your first question?
The first question is around looking at internal processes for bottom line profitability and possible partnerships with organizations that could help increase that efficiency.
Yeah, I mean, for Ford, we have done over the years. We have done all sort of benchmarking with other OEMs, quite quite a few years ago on the finished vehicle side, for example. No, as well for on inbound, we have done something with Renault, Nissan. I'm not sure if you were around Europe, but anyway, I've been in Paris with the people there, and we have done something with other OEMs. And so that, yes, we do that and have done it. The other thing is we employ occasionally as well sort of consultants, people who look from a different angle at this, not necessarily automotive experts, but experts just as this. We have as well done sort of benchmark with a separate company who seems to be good at this on freight rates, on all sort of trade lanes, not only automotive, but all sort of consumables and so on, so that we understand pretty good not only what a rate would be over 500 kilometers from north, south in Europe somewhere, but as well, and we learned a lot from this, for example, how we structure our contracts. For example, in terms of insurance, on damage claims, on all sort of things, fuel escalator clauses, road toll mouth clauses, you know, where we probably found that we pay a price for, in a nutshell, I can say, if we give, and it's not a surprise, but we learned it, we had somebody to tell us, but it's not a surprise. When we ask a service provider to take whatever risk on our behalf, that risk is a sort of insurance, if you want. That risk comes with cost attached to it. Say fuel, if we don't, and many years ago we didn't have fuel clauses at all, or very little in our contracts. I think we changed that over the last years. When we didn't have fuel clauses, and the fuel risk was entirely up to the service provider, to the carrier. I mean, what would you do so that you don't run immediately into a loss-making thing? You have to price it in right from the first place and predict what fuel might be, and you might be lucky or you're unlucky. Same with autos and so on, insurance. So, bottom line, what we learned from this is, and we changed our market test tender or conditions, terms and conditions, how we buy transportation. We changed that to accommodate certain things which we learned through this sort of benchmarking.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to comment to that as well, because there was a period where the tendency, especially in the contract, what Bert was referring to, was coming, a lot of the liabilities were really, in our belief, were actually transferred to the logistics service provider. And we feel now that there's much more of an open dialogue to talk about risks, to talk about mitigation of risk, or to eliminating or capping, put a cap on the risk. And I think that also allows a much more transparent discussion. It allows people to be a little bit more vulnerable, and to also say, look, this is my issue, and this is what I can address, and this is what we can do together. And if we can mitigate the risk in the supply chain, then of course, if you talk about capacity requirements and running the risks, I think that's a healthy development looking forward to the future. And so in that respect, it aligns much more the common purposes without having too many winners or losers, if you know what I mean.
Maybe if I come back to your question on the internal benchmarking, I think this was part of the question. We try to challenge as well our internal customers, because I think everybody tells you all the time that when you supply factories, it's very sensitive, you cannot stop a line and all this. And I think in the morning we saw that the quality standards are relatively high, so we are very sensitive on this service quality. However, when we discuss what would bring, I don't know, more flexible loading and unloading times, reduced truck turnaround time at the factories, for example, we sometimes, not always, but we sometimes have difficulties to understand what benefits this can bring. Because for us, these are major constraints or breakthroughs, or it's very, very heavy to discuss this with our internal customers. And so we need, how we say, tangible arguments to change things, because our systems are relatively rigid, etc. So these kind of discussions we would like to have them more, to be able to internally challenge our customers and say, okay, what if we give you better visibility, or we commit, or we increase flexibility? So what does it allow you to capture? Can you better or improve your empty mileage? Can you better fill? Can you, I don't know, make another turn in the same day? Or so these are the things that I believe we can still improve commonly.
Yeah, and I think also if you look at this process, I mean, obviously we've also seen that the tender management has gone much more of an objective way, so to say, or even automated, or very much transparent. And I think that's, you know, that's a development which stands as itself. But I think what's very important, also where we see that the biggest successes in collaboration between service providers, and whether it's a tier one supplier or OEM, is that next to that you have a very much more of an, let's say, a relation group where you just talk about the issues which you face as a company, which trends you see, because you can't do the one without the other, because it improves also the quality of the tenders, and also the ability to respond to that. You know, even simple things like, for example, as we call it the tender calendar, you know, how much can you actually notify people in the market that a tender in a certain area is coming up? So people can prepare, look at different alternatives, look at multimodal solutions, because you know how it goes. You get a tender, black and white, and within 2 weeks you have to come up with a solution. Now, you haven't been able to talk to partners, you haven't been able to train your people, etc., etc. And I think to allow this kind of a freedom together to discuss what is really needed and where you can really make improvements is ultimately where the benefit is also with the customers, or primarily also with the customers.
Yeah, I'd have to agree completely with Bram's point there, and the thing is, particularly from our point of view, when you get a tender to us is reactive. You're reacting to something, and you're reacting to historic information and historic data. And really, there's whilst there might be some projections based on future forecasting for OEMs and tier ones alike, if you look at it, it's the tier one's basing his forecast on the OEM. And then so you're getting, you're getting information that's being shared and maybe magnified and multiplied down the lines. There's kind of in there is spare parts and aftermarket as well that's added to production. But it'll come as no secret that when we as providers work closely in partnership and are able to talk to our customers, we have a lot better solution for them, and they're the ones that actually drive down the costs in the supply chain better. When you're coming out to market on a regular basis, and maybe 12 monthly or 2 yearly or something on a particular piece of trade and based on industry, all you can actually look at is the historic information that you've given, and you can't actually develop a solution that will work better. And as Bram quite rightly says, sometimes you get a ridiculously short timeline. I mean, we had a tender that came out last year for it was for a tier one, and it was for several thousand containers and movements, and there was minimal information that was supplied with it, but the response time was 5 days, and there was something like 700 different routes. Now, to respond to that in 5 days, frankly, I'm not even going to look at it. It's because of, and when you get something like that, you're commoditizing something which isn't and shouldn't be. Sometimes it does require an innovative solution, and you need time to look at that. And I think that when we're given that, I think we can come up with some pretty good solutions.
Would it help if overall in the industry we would adopt a model like for the train slot reservation, a kind of conferences? So if we would all tender from January to December every year, what would it bring? I know that some companies are doing it, companies that buy as much as we are buying, but would this help?
It's yes, obviously. I mean, it would in part help, but in honesty, there could be an awful lot more that we could do. That again is still forecasting and commoditizing, but it certainly would be something that you can then prepare what's happening in advance, and that's if we get advanced knowledge or something, then you can make sure that you have the resourcing available to be able to react to these situations. The worst thing in the world is that sometimes we'll get half a dozen tenders in the same week, and you're having to prioritize because we have a finite level of resourcing, and so you can only do so much in a certain time. And we're all the same. All of the providers in the room are in exactly the same position, but it's staggering. It's feast and famine in this industry, and you'll have nothing will be happening for a couple of months, and then all of a sudden you all decide to send out your tenders on the same day. end of the year is brilliant because everyone thinks we'll send the tender out in December and we'll give them till January the 5th or something to come back. We have Christmas too. And we hope we do anyway. So, but the amount that we get over the Christmas period is incredible, and it's certainly from our point of view, we know you're not going to look at it straight away. So just let's if we can plan things a little bit better, it would be beneficial.
Okay. Looking at sort of rail and multimodal, perhaps especially in cases where your networks have changed, have you increased or decreased the use of the mode, or do you see potential to change? Starting with Ford.
We try to increase, and especially as a very, very nice concept. And actually, I look at the face of one of our leaders in that arena here for my team. No, as we move the footprint to Valencia a lot in terms of product, and you all know that the track width in Spain was different, the Iberian gauge, but lucky enough, the government in Spain decided to make this Mediterranean corridor, so that will allow us someone in the future then to run Western European gauge all the way down. That gives more, so you save the axle changing at the border. You have as well more assets or more competition in that arena, because for the time being, obviously, if service providers from other countries find it difficult to run on the Iberian gauge. So that will change a lot. That is what we need. We are investing in our facilities in Valencia, in our rail terminal, to accommodate that for the future. So yes, that is what we need. We need it not just from cost perspective, but as well from, I think, from a CO2 perspective. We have environment protection on our scorecard as well as a key performance indicator, not just cost and timely delivery and this sort of things. Environment is a key for this, and I think rail is a key enabler for this.
Can I just add to that as well? From our perspective, that we're kind of lucky that with our ownership, being within SNCF, and the fastest growing part of our business portfolio has actually been in rail. For automotive particularly, and particularly in full and part trains from Europe to China, as a very real alternative to ocean, and certainly a cheaper alternative to air. And that's you're talking of not like double digit, you're talking of triple digit percentage growth in the last couple of years.
Bert, you mentioned more parts coming from places like China with global production. I mean, is a rail alternative something that you've considered, or for some flows or emergencies or something like that?
It's running now. There are people that's doing it. There's companies in this room that's doing it now. There's and certainly I'd say that some OEMs are more switched on to it than others. And both ways. It's not just from China, it's to China as well. In fact, there's significant volumes going to China. Certainly the German manufacturers are very, very switched on to this. And it's something that we've actually internally have increased the division within the company significantly in the last 6 months.
We have piloted this. I mean, obviously there is a service from, I think, Germany to China all the way, Trans-Siberia and so on. We have at least piloted it, I think, the other year. For us, it would make a lot of sense. But as you hear already, we have not implemented it as a permanent solution. It would make a lot of sense because we have quite some exchange of parts as well with our Russian joint venture. The plants, especially in this case, in Tatarstan. So you go already, I mean, quite a few thousand kilometers east. And so you could now think of combining that. So you put something, you bring Chinese material up to German plants, for example, or Western European plants, And then on the way back, you can at least stop at Tatarstan, at Chelny, Elabuga, and bring them material which they get from Western European suppliers or our own factories if it's in-house plants. So there's definitely quite some opportunity.
Probably have time for one more question from the floor, if we're taking a little bit.
Scott Krebs from Orbis Corporation. Just a quick question on, we're talking about global supply chains and globalization, and we're also talking about localization. And there's a, globalization seems like the OEMs are obviously, from a short-term profitability standpoint, you're always trying to have the lowest piece cost within your inbound packaging, and that's understandable. And there's certain areas that are attractive from cost efficiencies, from labor and energy, monetary changes in areas. So there's an attraction there. Do you see any long-term strategies or even policies from an OEM level that would help partner with Tier 1 suppliers and Tier 2 suppliers to really build towards localization and take the demand and the cost and the sustainability issues, time, complexity away from the demand on global shipping?
In Ford, in terms of production suppliers, in Ford we have certain preferred suppliers for certain commodities which we expect to follow us wherever we are in the world. So if we change our footprint or we open new factories, well, there's a lot of growth as well in Asia Pacific region where we build as Ford a number of new plants even, and we expect certain experts for certain components to follow us and obviously optimize. So I think you asked for sort of partnership. I would say that partly exists.
Okay, very good. Well, I think we probably should end there because we have lunch waiting. I know there's one more question I see in the back, but I actually think we've run over a bit, so my stomach is, I'm actually hungry, so I'm afraid I'm going to just cut it off there. And also I want to one-up Mark because he was able to make you all stand up and I'm able to make you all leave the room. So, but before you do, I'd like to thank our panel one more time. And add further questions, they're here. Please speak to them. Come and speak to them and meet them. So thanks again to the panel. Enjoy your lunch.